103, can we go? Hi, Karen, how are you doing? Fine, would you please call the roll?
I'd be happy to. And by the way, we are live on YouTube now.
Okay, welcome all of our friends on YouTube.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Here.
Senator Kinski.
Here.
Senator Steinmetz.
Here.
Chairman Perkins, you're here as well.
Yes,
So
I'm
that's-
here as well.
That's a full quorum.
Okay, thank you. So we have before us Senate File 1003, COVID-19 discriminatory practices prohibition. And Senator Steinmetz, I see that you are among others on here, but you are the, I guess you're listed as the prime sponsor. So why don't you take us through the bill?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, committee, for taking up this bill. So on May 7th, 2021, Governor Gordon issued a statewide directive prohibiting vaccine passports, and that is kind of the premise of this bill. So we have placed it in Title 35, so that kind of reorganized it as the draft that we first came out with. So it starts out first on page 2 with our insurance coverage. It's in Title 26, which is the insurance code, and Chapter 20 mandated coverage. As you'll remember, this was a part where our insurance comes into play. And so the descriptions or definitions page is on page 5 of the bill that this is referring to. That's a new section. And so this basically states at the bottom of page 2 that an insurer providing group or an individual policy, contract, or plan for health insurance shall not use the COVID-19 vaccination status of a person as the basis to reject, deny, limit, cancel, refuse to renew, increase the premiums for, limit the amount, extent, or kind of coverage available to otherwise adversely affect eligibility for or coverage for the group or individual health policy, contract, or plan for health insurance. And the reason I believe this is really important is my husband works in the insurance industry. He could see this going into effect either way, whether a person is vaccinated or non-vaccinated. He could see insurance companies detrimentally hurting their clientele with a COVID restriction. And so, for example, as of now, non-vaccinated is something they're looking heavily into, but if there were to arise complications from vaccination, that could be a problem as well. So this bill seeks to level the playing field and make sure that we're treating everyone equal without COVID being a part of that. We also say, going down, that terminating the contract with the person's healthcare provider is another thing that they don't want COVID-19 to be a part of. Also, an insurer providing a policy shall not do any of the following regarding the administration of COVID-19: provide financial or other incentives to a participating healthcare provider based on attending a certain immunization administration for COVID-19. So basically no kickbacks there. Impose financial or other penalties for participating a healthcare provider who does not attain a certain immunization administration rate for COVID-19. So we can't penalize our healthcare providers. And then it shall not be used as a factor in the rating of a group or individual policy, contract, or plan for health insurance in the state. So that's basically the insurance part of that. Then we're
You want us
on.
to ask you a couple questions as we go along?
Yeah, you sure can.
Okay, it's just a question on that. A couple questions, Senator Steinmetz. On the bottom page 3, you've got, do I understand that correctly, that would prohibit an insurer from providing an incentive either to vaccinate or not to vaccinate?
Yes.
So the insurer doesn't get to incentivize what they think is in their best interest, as well as maybe that of the insurers.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, while we're on page 3, if we can go to page, I'm trying to understand. So if we go to page 3 and we go up to line 1, and it says increase the premiums for, and the question I have here, Senator Steinmetz, this deals with both groups and individual healthcare policies. Does that line then increase premiums for, does that include both? I'm assuming groups and
Yes,
individuals.
yes,
So
which is on page 2, if you look at subsection
Yeah, so
B.
this is the person.
Yes,
So the question I have under, so we have an insurance company, they're running their premiums based on actuarial estimates of what it's going to cost. So if they run through there and they say, well, if you are non-vaccinated, you have the higher probability actuarially that you're going to incur more cost for health. Let's assume that's true. It may not be true. Let's just assume that. Then if you were in a group plan, it would not allow that insurer to raise that premium for the group.
that's correct.
And my concern is why would those other members that have been vaccinated then, because their premiums can't go up, but are they going to lose their health insurance? What I'm trying to figure out is why we would have one group subsidize another group for a decision that they've made that's not coerced or any other. And why would those people that have got vaccinated, yet the cost of healthcare is going up for this within the group? Now, I would agree with this as an individual. I'm more inclined to support that. I'm just trying to understand why we would say this group over here is going to drive up the healthcare costs and I got to pay for it.
Mr.
Senator.
Chairman, Senator Hicks, that's what we're saying is no one can drive up the healthcare costs. They have to remain stable regardless of whether you can't rate on COVID-19 is what you're saying. Because basically what you're saying, you're putting everyone on an equal playing field. We're saying you cannot rate up for vaccination status. Vaccination status on page 5, where it is identified in the definitions, is whether you're vaccinated or non-vaccinated. We're just saying you cannot take COVID-19 into consideration when you are making this decision. That's what we're doing.
So,
Go ahead.
which brings us, kind of, I think begs two questions, Senator Steinmetz. First one is, I mean, it's one thing to say you can't raise the premium on the group, or even that you can't raise the premium on the individual. I think that's within statutory authority to do that. I don't know exactly how that works going forward because there's some existing contracts are in effect. But anyway, at some point that becomes effect. I think the state has authority to do that. But but what's going to happen is whether the costs are lower or higher, whether it's vaccinated or unvaccinated, whether costs are lower or higher, they're spread. I mean, the insurance company has to spread those across the pool. And so what you're saying is you can't do that to this group or this individual, but ultimately that factor has to go back into the actuarial nature of insurance. They've got to factor that cost, whether it's an increased cost or a lower cost. That has to be reflected across premiums in some fashion, because that's what insurance is a pooling of risk, and then those people pay off. So but I guess that's, so I mean, that's the effect. And that's generally why I think, in my recollection, I think Wyoming has got 4 of these. This is, I think, maybe the 5th one, where we say, all right, insurance company, you shall provide this coverage or not provide that coverage. So, I mean, do we understand that I mean, the cost is going to be reflected in policy rates of in premium rates of some sort, right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it will be reflected in some sort of premium rates. It's just that you can't use that as a factor. Obviously, there will be ramifications from going to the hospital, and there will be something that they code it under because they have their specific codes and all of that. However, to just discriminate regarding COVID-19 implications, Corey can just see it coming down the pike to where, regardless of which it is, one or the other may have a detrimental effect, and then people may not be able to receive coverage or go forward with a company, and they might be able to discriminate with against you on one or the other, because if it is found to have ramifications going forward, the vaccination in years to come, then we might have the same thing going that way. So if you wanted to put a sunset date on it, maybe we could do that. But for now, initially, we just don't want to see these big companies, which kind of have a monopolistic nature
Well, that's gonna.
as far as what companies are available. And
Yeah.
so that's what this is designed to get at.
So, let's assume that there's one health insurance provider that dominates the market in a certain state.
Do we have to
Let's
assume,
assume
or we
that.
know that to be
Yeah, let's
the
assume that.
fact?
Let's say, for example, their initials were SB, but
BS.
how does that, and I guess I'm certainly no insurance lawyer, and probably more ignorant of that insurance than a lot of people, but when they have that grief, ultimately, that the insurer, like I said, has to spread that across the system. So what that means is, I guess they can't, the way you see that is that, so if I've got a small group policy that, that I run a small office, so I'm providing insurance to my people, that's my group. They can't single out my group. They have to spread that cost or that cost savings, whatever it is, across all of the entire insurance pool, not just that one individual employer and their group.
Yeah, because it's based on vaccination status, not claims. I mean, your claims factor in, but you can't rate a person up just because of their vaccination status. You
Okay.
have to base it on your claims
And
history.
then and so this might be a question for somebody that you're related to. Is there anything like surplus lines for health insurance in the state?
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
I'm just, because I don't know if, like, when you get into the federal marketplace and stuff, I don't know that, I think you can get insurance, but I don't know that those guys, I don't know that those insurers, are they required to be in the state, or they just have like a surplus lines thing where they have to just show that they're creditworthy, kind of a thing.
May I get back to you on that?
Yeah, and so that's, anyway, I just
Yeah.
wondering about that, because I'm wondering, do we have the authority to expand this to where it's on these individual policies that may be by an insurer that is kind of, for lack of a better term, a surplus lines type of carrier in the state? And I don't know if we have any. I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, wouldn't a surplus lines carrier still have to be under the jurisdiction of the state to do business in the state? They have to follow our state statutes if they have a license to do business in the state of Wyoming.
I don't know how the group works, but so when he does that, I mean, maybe I don't know how many people. I just don't know how that works in that situation. And the other situation that it brings to mind, though, is also the state insurance pool, the state insurance account. And so how does it work in that? Because that's all one group, but it's all one pool. And we're self-insured, but how does that apply to the state of Wyoming on how the state of Wyoming administers the employee insurance accounting program?
That's
Because
a
they
good
have to
question.
they have to do something with the cost.
Yeah, that's a good question, Mr. Chairman. But the cost is different than the vaccination status. Your claims and your rating is different than discriminating based
Right.
on
Mr.
vaccination
Chairman.
status.
Go ahead.
If I may, and I would agree with Senator Steinmetz, that's not the way I read this. So I think you accomplish that. They can't reject, they can't deny, they can't limit, they can't cancel, and they can't refuse to renew based on your vaccination status. They just can't do that.
Right.
Increase the premiums for,
Mhm.
and it's the increasing the premium side, because if the actual cost of the insurance of the pool goes up or the individual, my concern is if we say you can't make a reasonable profit by providing insurance, because we've limited your ability to increase premiums to cover the cost of the pool. And then we come down and we get into subsection C. We say, but you can't drop them because the premiums, I think we boxed insurers in the point where I'm not so sure that if we got to, we may not. I'm just looking out as a potential hypothetical. I agree with the reject, deny, limit, cancel, refuse to renew. Limit the amount, you know, if you're gonna offer $100,000, you know, whatever your deductible is, those need to be optional. I just worry that we're going into the private sector and saying, if we can come up with some language, as long as the actuarially program
Yeah.
is still viable.
Yep.
You can't raise it for that purpose, but just to say you can't raise premiums, because it may be something completely different. And I understand what you're trying to get to. You're
Right.
saying you can't raise premiums just because you're not vaccinated.
Right.
But it may be things that has unrelated to vaccinations, that it could be that they have a lot of people with high risk of heart disease, and all of a sudden they have a large case, they have to raise premiums. How are you going to distinguish why they had to raise premiums? Well, I look at this as a trial lawyer's dream, is to come back and say, well, you raise premiums and my patient or my client hasn't been vaccinated, and that's why you're raising them.
I see that point. I thank you for raising that, Mr. Chairman and Senator Hicks. If
I
we
don't
can-
have an answer. I just,
Yeah.
I really think I think that's the one that gives me the issue that we need to think that.
Okay, point taken. I appreciate that input.
And yeah, and thank you. And thank you. Thanks for jumping in and making my point clear. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. I think,
And the only thing I can think about that is what you have to do is, I think the point is you can't single out a certain employer and do that. But like I say, that when I think about the state's employment benefit plan, then I mean, you can't not increase, you know, it's gonna tie back to the cost of care in the end anyway, right? I mean, we have those guys look at that in the actuary, and we fund it or we don't fund it. We look at the employee benefit account, and we decide if it's too low or too high, and so I mean, so somehow we have to be able to create an exception that allows, and I think there's some counties that are self-employed. I think there might be a large employer or two that are self-employed out there, and they don't have any choice but to reallocate that cost. But so we just got to figure out a way to let that happen. And maybe what it is, and I don't know if it's just right now, maybe it's, anyway, we'll have to figure that out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So it's just a suggestion. Maybe what you want to do is we take that out now.
Okay, show
And
me
you bring that back
exactly
as
where
a-
you want
as
to take it out.
A Romanette I, and make it explicitly clear
Okay,
that they have to demonstrate that any premium increase is not solely for the purpose of. Anyway,
Yeah, something about whether group is the pool, that's the exception. The group is the pool, you can't do that. You have to allow them to recover to figure out what their costs are and pay for it.
right. And I don't disagree with you on that. It's just, my intent was just purely based on vaccination status, not on claims.
So we don't have to amend this bill right now, but keep that in mind. We can come back and work with that.
Okay, all right.
Because we can pull out and create an exception, I think is maybe the way to do that.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks had made a suggestion of a Romanette I. Where did you think that would go?
well, underneath that section, so you would have A.
Which page?
that subsection B, no person shall.
Which page?
But no, it's gonna have to come back under the insurer. Quite frankly, I would have staff,
No, but which page?
page 3.
Page 3, it
Page
says
3, section
some
I.
kind of clarification that like a Roman I or something, or B,
Yeah,
which, you
Under
finish at
B.
B before you get to C. Somehow you create an exception. There, we'll see. There might be other places that you could put it, but yeah. So then when you get the bottom of page 3, and so I guess one of the things I would add, this kind of comes back to your my private discussion here a few minutes ago. So we're saying you can't provide an incentive to participate.
Mr.
So
Chairman.
is that just simply saying you can't bribe a healthcare provider to tell you to get a vaccine or not get a vaccine?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what it says.
Why?
This isn't aimed at
Why?
the individual, this is aimed at the provider.
This is aimed at,
Yeah.
not at the insurer, just the healthcare provider. Or is,
Glad I did. I'm
what if,
glad I did it
so
last
what if the
night.
healthcare provider is the employer?
What's that?
What if the healthcare provider is the employer and the purchaser of the group?
That's a good question. Hadn't contemplated quite that.
So Blue Cross Blue Shield couldn't do it for their own employees.
So you're saying,
Or a doctor's office. The doctor says, I want my employees to be vaccinated. I'll pay for your vaccination. Is that broad enough that it covers, so the doctor says, well, I can't pay for vaccination because the legislature said, I can't, I'm not participating in healthcare.
This only
program."
pertains to insurance.
this is just insurance in Title 26. This is just an insurance company. It's not a,
But, okay, so I'll take that clarification. So right now, I mean, I know people that will, you know, they'll say, if you go get a flu shot, I'll pay for it. And so is that the type of incentive that you're seeking to stop, or is it just, if it's just, you say, listen, all right, Walgreens, I'll give you a $5 bounty on every COVID vaccination that you do, or what is that? How does that work? How does
Mr.
it-
Chairman, the way I envision it working is that the insurance agency cannot give a kickback to a participating healthcare provider based on attaining a certain immunization rate for COVID-19. So it's between the insurer and the healthcare provider. So
How would that, I'm still figuring out how that would work.
if they're using it like a wellness benefit or something like that,
But you're saying you can't provide a wellness benefit?
no, you're saying that the insurance company can't instead of incentivize this particular wellness benefit because what if it's just putting a prohibition on that?
I just libertarian in me has to go.
Yeah,
It's a
I'm not
financial
tied to that.
incentive. It's not a mandate.
Yeah,
It's not coerced. It's just one of those things that if you want to take the incentive, you can exercise your free God-given liberties as
To do it.
a citizen of the United States of America and the state of Wyoming to take that incentive. And so for me personally, I think this goes a little bit too far from saying that you can't provide this. It doesn't say you have to mandate it or anything. It's a voluntary
yeah.
program. It is strictly voluntary.
And Senator, I would be fine with taking that part out if that's what the committee would choose to do. It's not a problem at all.
I have a good friend of mine, and he worked, it's a doctor's office, and they wanted their people to get vaccinated, but they didn't want to make them. So if you got vaccinated, they would pay for the vaccination. And then they would pay for the vaccinations. You get the day off. You go get the vaccination, you get the next day off with pay. Just in case you had a reaction like someone on this panel did when he got his vaccination. And then they gave him, I think, a $25 gift certificate. And so she grabbed her husband and said, we're going to get our vaccination because I want my $50 gift. He said, okay. And my day off, but anyway.
So on to page 4, what do you guys think about impose a financial or other penalty on a participating healthcare provider who does not attain a certain immunization administration rate?
So, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
My question, are you aiming this at what CMS and the current administration are angling to do with the hospitals and such? Okay, so let me ask you this. How far do we get with this when the feds just cut off their payments? They're not going to be looking at what laws we passed. How do we enforce this?
Yeah, are you talking the penalty?
Yeah. Yeah. Because-
For the insurance company.
Yeah, in other words, they are, the initial talk was that CMS, which is administered by insurance companies, that the regulation might just say, get 100% or we're withholding your Medicare and Medicaid. Now there's talk that it might be, well, we might give, if you attain a certain level, we'll give you a few more dollars. And if you're below that level, we'll start penalizing you in an increasing degree. So you're going to take from the hospitals that don't achieve and give to the hospitals that do achieve. And I was looking at just the instructions to the federal contractors, and it just said any state law to the contrary, our position is the supremacy clause trumps that, and you're not to comply with any contrary state law. That's the instructions to the contractors. So I can't, how do we reconcile this to what, I mean, what we're subjecting them to is a private lawsuit for doing what Medicare says they have to do or they'll bankrupt them.
The insurance company.
Yeah, whoever is administering all of the healthcare system for Medicaid and Medicare is administered by healthcare insurance companies. They just contract it out.
Yes.
So how do we reconcile? What does the hospital do if they say, well, I'll get sued if I under Wyoming law, if I don't comply? I'm just trying to see how this actually is enforced, given that the feds control the money. I'm trying to figure out how this works relative to our hospitals.
Well, I was trying to protect the hospital by not allowing the insurance to impose a financial penalty on them. That was the gist of page 4, line 1 through 3.
So going back to that question, Senator Linsky, would CMS, I don't think CMS is not insured, so I don't think this doesn't affect CMS. This doesn't affect even, I mean, the insurer just has a private contract to
Administer.
CMS, but they're not really an insurer because they're, in that case, they're acting as a CMS.
I guess I'd say if we're sure of that, then I'm okay with it. Except for I have the same problem that my libertarian friend does on incentives, but
On the penalty part, or
if the penalty part is purely intrastate and we're not putting the hospitals in a bad position vis-a-vis Medicaid or Medicare.
It pertains to the insurer provider, so it's the insurance company the way I read it.
that's right.
I think that's right.
It's not the healthcare.
No, it's the insurance company.
And so I guess if you think about it, I guess the way that could happen is, so you're an in-group, you're an in-group participating provider. And you can't say the insurance, you can't say to them, all right, Dr. X, your rate, unless your employees, unless you're unless you achieve 75% vaccination rate among your employees, we're no longer going to honor our contract rate, and now your contract rate is, instead of $100, now it's $150.
That's right.
Or excuse me, now it's $100, it's now $75.
Yeah. It'd be a penalty. And the thought was to try to protect them from that. So,
Okay.
all right. And then the next is E. The COVID-19 vaccination status of a person covered by a group or individual policy, contract, or plan for health insurance shall not be used as a factor in the rating of the group or individual policy, contract, or plan for health insurance of this state. And that is just vaccination status. That is not claims. So in other words, if you walk in and if your company chooses not to require vaccinations which this bill will address farther on too. They can't just rate you up for just that. That doesn't exclude them for your rate history and all of the other actuarials that they run or do for your businesses normally. So, I mean, every year there's a renewal based on your usage of your plan. And you may get a rate up of 50%. It might be 1, it might be, and you have to deal with that every year. So we're just saying that it's just, if you walk in and base it just on vaccination status, we're saying no to that. That's all it does. Does that make
And
sense?
it's just the operative word in this section, status.
Status, vaccination status, which we're going to get
So you have
to the
it.
definition after this. The way the bill was structured last time was easier to explain than going through the insurance first and then the definition second. I probably should have taken that to you. All right. And so we're going to go on to page 5 and look at our definitions.
But these definitions are applied to public accommodation, right?
They're applied to the entire bill. So as you saw on page 2,
No
They're
vaccination.
pulled into the insurance code as well. So that this is applicable. So does that make sense? All right. So now we're on page 5. And I'm glad you guys are here to help me work on this bill because we've all worked hard, but we're all here to improve them as well. So we just have the definition of COVID-19 immunity passport. It means a document, a digital record or software application that is evidence that a person has received their COVID-19 vaccination. Pretty simple there. What a vaccination is, COVID-19 vaccination, any vaccine that's marketed to prevent COVID-19, that is marketed to diminish or decrease symptoms of COVID-19. And then COVID-19 vaccination status means evidence of whether a person has received 1 or more doses of the COVID-19 vaccine. In talking with staff, one of the questions I had there is, does this cover both? Well, I mean, all of us are either one or the other. We're either vaccinated or not. So it includes both of those statuses. It doesn't differentiate in any way. We're not protecting one side of the issue and not the other. So then we have our definition of healthcare and then a public accommodation. And so that's, a private entity that owns, leases to, or operates a place of public accommodation. So then we're just saying that no person shall, and we're on page 6 now.
Shannon,
Go ahead.
can I ask a question because this language shows up and I'm sure it's something I'll also craft that I don't know. Under the definition of COVID-19 vaccination, it says means any vaccine that is marketed to prevent COVID-19 or, and this is the part I don't necessarily, any vaccine that is marketed to diminish or decrease the symptoms of COVID-19.
And
Why is that new? Are we marketing vaccines to decrease the symptoms? The very definition of a vaccine is to provide you antibodies so that you have an immune system. And maybe that's the diminished part. I don't know.
that's a great question. That
It's
one that
not
I didn't
just in
think
this
of.
bill, it shows
It's
up
in all
on-
of them. Yeah.
I'm curious to ask LSA
Yeah.
why that additional language needs to be.
That's a great question. Mine was, should it be has or has not received 1 dose? And they said, no, it covered all of it. So that's a great question. We can ask them.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead.
so on page 5, line 18, as we get into, so now we're leaving healthcare and we're getting into public accommodations and on to page 6. So basically what you were saying here is, and if I'm a motel owner and if I is operating my business, I determine that I want to have people show me that they have a vaccination record to stay in my motel. It's illegal now with this bad boy, right?
Correct.
So when I have this and I show it, and if I ask for it from, that's bad.
Whose cell phone is it?
Mine,
Mr.
my
Chairman.
vaccination record, which
That's your
I went to a
passport?
tennis tournament last week and I couldn't get in the door with that.
Yeah,
That's your
Mr. Chairman.
That's my passport.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. But yes, Mr. Chairman, it's basically
Yeah.
providing that you can't discriminate based on vaccination status.
And I can't, if I can follow up
Sure, go ahead.
on to page 6. So
Mr. Chairman, I need.
Okay, good luck.
good luck.
Good luck,
Thank you.
Dave.
Give them health.
Do we need to leave the vote open for Senator Kinsler? All right.
So once again, if my restaurant says that since I work in an airport and by federal law and FAA law rules, that I have to ask people to show me that passport to be able to serve them, then I'm violating the law. Under
Yes,
this law.
Mr.
So by
Chairman.
adhering to that federal law, I'm breaking this state law, right?
Mr. Chairman, there is no federal law yet, right? I mean, there's the FAA, but are you talking about in the airport, you have to see a vaccine passport?
They're toying with that, yeah.
Well,
But if they do,
Mr. Chairman, that is
that's.
what we're pushing back on.
I understand.
And also, Mr. Chairman, I would just add to that, I mean, we as business owners, we can't say, show me your AIDS passport, show me that you don't have AIDS to come into my facility, show me that you don't have hepatitis C, show me that you don't have, yeah, all of those things. I mean, where do we draw the line? So we're
Okay.
drawing a line.
And I'm just asking the question.
I
because
appreciate
then
that.
And so, and this is, no.
You're a
I'm saying
great
this is why
colleague and I
it makes
appreciate
it-
that.
It makes it tough, especially when and it goes back to all these federal contracts and all these things that, you choose to take them. And if you choose to take them, there are strings attached, just like our CARES Act dollars and our ARPA dollars. There are challenges. Last year, they were called challenges. This year, they're called strings, but it just moves forward. But so one to understand.
Mr. Chairman, I think they were called strings last year too.
I heard you. Thank you.
So basically, we're just saying you can't refuse or deny a person's services, goods, advantages, privileges that are public in nature. And then this is on line 10. This is something that the chairman and I have been talking about. Ask a person or inquire to a person's COVID-19 vaccination status. Or require an immunity passport in order for the person to access services. This is something that our governor has come out and made his statement on. And then we were also talking about, can an employer require that? Are we affecting their freedom of speech? And I did pass out the pre-employment inquiries and medical questions and examinations under the ADA. And that's found in 29 CFR 1630.14 under medical examinations and inquiries. An employer can ask, can you pick up a box that's 50 pounds? Can you, job related employment questions, but you can't say, do you have AIDS? Do you have, all of those very personal questions? We can't ask that as employees. So that is why I put that in there, because it's a very personal
So,
question.
but this is a pre-employment and public accommodation is not about employment. It's about public patronage and what you can or can't do with someone that comes in. And I just don't know. I mean, if it's employment, I get that. It's an employment practice. It just seems in the back, I go back to what was it? The trespass bill.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you come back in and I just,
Free speech.
this free speech, I mean, you're asking a person, it's not related to employment. So it's not saying it's a condition of employment, it's a condition of, it's a different version of no shirt, no shoes, no service. And so, I think you can make it, I think as a practical matter, you can make it illegal to take any action. I don't know that but I don't know that you can stop a person from asking.
Well,
That's
that might be a good point. I was looking at it more in the context of what we as employers can and can't do. So that might be a great point that
And
we could say no one can require, we can't, we're already saying you can't withhold services.
Yeah, I mean, it's-
I
So,
think you've already got it.
so we've probably got it covered. So we could take that out.
yeah, I think that's, because that's what the public accommodation isn't about employment, it's about serving the public. And that's, you go back to, remember back to our discussions about, we were doing this a few years ago, whether or not, sexual orientation or sex identity was, that was going to be a basis, it was going to be illegal or not to refuse service based on that. And that's what we're
Right.
talking about here. You're not talking about employment, you're talking about Roman I there, I think. But there's something that just sticks in my mind that I read recently about something about a part of a law that was struck down because simply asking something is an infringement on freedom of speech.
Well, the other
Prior
part about,
response is the problem.
yeah, so the other part about that, and maybe we just need to reorganize it, is that it does go into our employment statutes on page 10 under physical examination of employees and religious exemptions. So it goes into our labor and employment law.
And in fact, when I look at this, I just got curious because we've got discrimination based, but we have a separate public accommodation statute. And I don't know how this fits in with that, but we'll figure that out. We'll figure that out.
Well, it was how our attorneys drafted it. And so I don't claim to be an attorney and, or have those skills, but I've done my best to work on this and get it to where we have something to work with here.
I think you accomplish it with Roman I. I really don't think you need to bring in Roman too.
Okay. I put an X through that.
Because it is specifically just the only operable difference is one is they can't refuse, withhold, or deny. This one just says you can't ask first.
Mhm.
If you go back up there, they can't refuse you from entering the business. Can't refuse you from the licensing, employment, healthcare, education. I'd be curious as to, well, the only thing I see is the difference is ask first. And my concern is similar to Senator Perkins. You run a potential challenge of somebody coming up and ended up in federal court. Been there before with,
Yeah.
all the way to the 10th Circuit Court.
I think employment was probably what drove that part in there because it does talk about employment, but you're probably right. It's covered in I.
So you say strike that.
Yeah,
Then
just
on
strike
page
it.
Well,
6,
strike Romanet 2,
Romanet 2 or Romanet,
2 on page 6.
okay, that's.
The
what I
whole
thought. Okay.
section 10 through 17, which we're not working the bill yet. I know we're just still explaining it, but that is will be a proposed amendment.
Yeah, okay.
All right, then it just provides for the violation. So it's the 6 months shall not exceed 6 months or $750 or both. And it allows in E for civil penalties, civil cause of action. So those are the 2 enforcement mechanisms.
Can we back up?
Yeah, go ahead.
Senator?
Yes.
I'm looking at subsection C now. No, skip that. Never mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then after we get through those 2 sections,
No, can we do back up?
go
Go ahead.
back up.
So
Okay.
just the mechanics of the bill. So subsection B, goes, no person shall.
You have green books.
And they shall refuse, withhold, or deny to a person services, good facilities, advantages, privileges. The whole thing. And what I'm trying to figure out is
Is-
how does a person refuse or withhold or deny to a person any service, goods? So would this be like if I was in private practice in my home? So it would deal just, and I'm my own business. I can't deny somebody. And then we get down to subsection C is no public accommodation. So that's the restaurant. So one's the person, one's the facility. Is that's the way I read it. So I can't deny you under subsection B as a person, any of these services, goods, facilities, and then subsection C's no public accommodation.
Let me interject just one thought.
Okay.
A person, I think in this context is not an individual.
It's a court.
It can be, but it's not limited to that. It can be, it's any individual or entity.
So the definitions of public accommodation, I think, address that. It means a private entity that owns, leases, or operates a place of public accommodation as the term is defined in 28 CFR 36-104. And I don't have that definition with me right in front of me.
So what's the difference?
The green book.
It's not a person, it's a public accommodation.
A person in this context would mean Walt Disney Corporation,
Yeah, it's
McDonald's Corporation.
intended to be a
Any list
business.
It would be a corporate
Well,
person.
Yeah, it's like
You
what,
can't. Public entity, a public accommodation means a private entity. Which would be, is a private entity still a corporate? Or,
let me look that up really quick.
so I see the difference. Public accommodation. So
It's
when we
not
get
your
down here,
house.
This would prevent somebody that owns ability to lease it, rent it, operate any of those public facilities. Okay,
That was here for section 2, but
This part we're talking about.
because of your vaccinations.
Right.
One of them is to refuse you to be able to come into my business. The other one is
Right.
you can't refuse me to lease your, if it's up for a public building, it's up for lease just because, okay. I'm
Yeah.
good. A little slow on the uptake.
Yep. Okay, we got it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then we had the
Hold on just a
penalties.
second.
No,
This is confusing to me. They have this in the health regulations.
so yes, Mr. Chairman. It is in the health regulations because we were asked to put it there. But it, according to our staff, it is still a standalone statute. They had it in Title VI to begin with, but they didn't feel it was, there were others who didn't feel that was an appropriate place for it. So it's been put in Title 35.
I mean.
As a standalone.
Yeah, this is a staff thing. So anyway, we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
So we're identifying things to work on for tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that you take that statute, just make it in the right place, whether it's in the public accommodation statute, whether it's in the health statute, it's.
Yeah.
It's gonna go wherever it's
Yeah,
gonna
we can
go.
fix that.
That's a-
Okay.
That's not a major thing. We'll just check
So
that.
the rest is just amending existing
Just
statute.
conforming.
So Title I, Code of Civil Procedures, Chapter 1, that was the business liability that we passed last section. And so it's just putting this in there to exempt that portion of liability. The next one is Title 14, Children, and Chapter 4, Children's Care Facilities. Basically, they can't discriminate based on vaccination status. Title 21, Education, Chapter 4, Pupils. Just making the same conforming amendment there. Chapter or Title 27, Labor and Employment, Chapter 11, saying you can't discriminate there. Title 35, Health and Safety, Chapter 4, Communicable Diseases, inserting it there under treatment and immunity from liability.
Question. So as you go into this, the page 8 and the children stuff, we're still talking about COVID now, or now we're
It's still COVID. It's
Okay.
prohibiting discrimination.
Right. So as I understand it, Senator Steinmetz, so what we've got in series, in another series here, starting on page 7, we have a series of, most have to do with immunizations.
Mhm.
And as I read this, I understood it that it was simply, the only prohibition is on COVID-19 vaccinations.
Yep.
So
It's the only one.
every conformant entity, the only exception from the mandatory immunization is specifically COVID-19 vaccinations.
we're not inadvertently.
No,
No.
we
up to
made it
theory
very
and whooping
narrow
cough and
to,
Polio and all the rest of those ones that
No.
I got vaccinated for.
no, it
So-
wasn't.
Yellow fever.
Overseas,
Yeah.
and all that.
All of it.
So, yeah, so the one thing I would ask about is on 24, on 21, and here's a question for you, because I don't know the answer. Is a private school a public accommodation?
No.
And because you do have this one spot on page 8 where immunization for children attending schools, and you've got any person attending a full part-time or public or private school or kindergarten. So, I just, if it's not a private, if the private school is a public accommodation, so be it. But I just, like I say, that's a private school, and if it's, that private school could be, it could be the Seventh-day Adventists, it could be the Baptists, it could be, it could be the synagogue, it could be whatever. It might be running a school on the side as a private school. And is it your intent that that would be broad enough that we would also say, sorry, you can't require?
I don't think they'd be captured under 35. That only deals with public accommodations. So except as prohibited by, that only deals with
Public. Let-
accommodations. So I don't think the private school would be captured in the statute.
No, but
Mr. Chairman, can we ask our staff attorney about that and just,
yeah, we can. And that's which is the whole issue about placement in the healthcare statutes is, I think, because it's in the healthcare statutes, I think it maybe does. If it captures private schools and those types of private functions but if it was in the public accommodation area, I don't think it would. But that's something we need to, we can wrestle with that and we can figure that out. I mean, that's, we're gonna have plenty of time to work this bill on the floor. And, but anyway.
So get an opinion from see what they think.
I will.
Could we allow this time for a good senator to try to work on some of this and then we take it back up before we send it to the floor? Or,
Well, I mean, we could do this. I mean, we could do this. We could come in and we could take a recess now. We could come back in an hour.
well, either that or even come back in the morning before we start,
We'll start at 8:30.
whatever. I didn't just give staff time.
No, I
Yeah.
understand. Why don't we just, let's take this. Why don't you,
Mr. Chairman, before we
Go
do
ahead.
that, could we get a list of all our questions? Finish out the bill. Did you look all over the rest of
I
it?
think we're,
Let's get finished out the bill and then we'll
I think we're,
make sure I have all our
think
list
we're
of
just about there.
questions.
I've
I
got
think we're-
one on line 10.
Okay,
or
page
10,
10.
line 23.
Yeah, that was the physical examination of employees and
I just-
religious
I just hate
exemption.
adverbs in the statute, so after shall, can you strike that?
What's that?
Ever be required. Oh, yeah.
Shall forever,
Immunization that violates WS.
shall ever be,
Forever and ever.
let's de-everize this.
Well,
Say shall be required.
okay, well, you're welcome.
If that
It's
normalization,
an adjective that's certainly.
So-
not a mess.
so
I don't
yours,
know. I didn't write that.
so now Charlie Scott's got these, said the suchify stuff, so now we got some other.
Shall we
ones.
do that one too?
So let's, is there anything else? Let's go back to the beginning. Let's just flip through so
Okay, so
that,
let's,
we can
let me
get
make a
Karen on board.
list. Let's make a list and let's get this.
okay.
Okay,
And
so
maybe even a public.
So anyway, is there any public comment for this bill? Yes, please come on.
There might be a couple more questions to add in.
yeah, that would be
Yeah.
great.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Heather Roday, and I'm from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Wyoming. So hopefully that might help with some of the questions that we might have. I think speaking to the insurer part of this legislation, I guess one of the things that I would point out is there, as the discussion has pointed out, there isn't a great definition of who an insurer is. Right? So we have Medicare, we have Medicaid that are all federal, and those laws, those entities make their own rules. But then as we've talked about the state plan, we've also talked about the group plans, right? So in the cases of when a group plan hires an insurer to process the claims, then it's the group that's actually making the decisions about their plan. We're processing them. So I guess I would just raise that as a point of clarification that would be helpful.
So for example, if I can just butt in for a
Sure.
second, for example, Natrona County itself is a self-insured plan, but Blue Cross Blue Shield is the administrator of the plan.
Mr. Chairman, isn't Natrona County part of the state plan?
Nope. Has its own plan, and Blue Cross Blue Shield administers the plan on behalf of Natrona County.
Okay,
So I have in my wallet a Blue Cross Blue Shield card that says, but I know that it's a plan, and what they do is they self-insure, they do a stop limit policy on that, and
Mhm.
every year they set that, and Blue Cross Blue Shield just insures the plan. So, excuse me, it just administers the plan. So in that instance, that goes back to our discussion about CMS. Blue Cross Blue Shield is not the insured of that plan. They're simply the administrator. Natrona County is self-insured.
correct, Mr. Chairman.
And so and that, which kind of gets back again, it's just a mini version of the state discussion. Natrona County's got to do whatever it's good to do to keep its plan solvent. That's not that, so you can't, that prohibition is not on Blue Cross Blue Shield with respect to that plan. They're simply the administrator.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay.
And then I think that just generally speaking, we don't have processes in place to do any of what that we're prohibiting, right? Like, we're not allowed to discriminate based on vaccination status. So this isn't something that we could do really today. But there are unintended consequences potentially. So we've talked about some of them. We do have federal implications. And so if the administration comes through and says you have to administer the marketplace in a certain way, that would then conflict with some of these rules, that then puts us in a bind. And so I think that has to do with, I think, our greatest concerns about the provisions in this part of the bill.
Right. And that's, thank you. Any questions any other questions? Was it, last name is Rudy?
It's Roe Day. So it's
Roe Day.
maiden name Roe, married name
Oh, okay.
Day.
Roe Day. Okay.
Oh, gotcha.
Gotcha. Thanks for explaining.
Thank
So,
you.
anyway, any questions for Ms. Roday? Any other questions for Ms. Roday? Thank you.
Thank you, members of the committee.
Good point. Is there anybody who's online that's trying to participate, Karen?
We had a couple people sign up, but no, they're not in the waiting room.
talk.
Are they in the waiting room of a covered healthcare provider or? Sorry.
There's only one.
Okay.
Oh,
All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and close off public comment. So let's go back and let's go back on page one, and let's kind of recreate this
okay,
and allow you to get some notes. And then I think what we'll do is we'll let you go up and chat with staff for a minute and come back and tell us whether we should just recess for an hour or an hour and a half or something and come back, or whether we should, we could recess until 7:30-ish. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
that's fine,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. Okay,
All right, so let's go to page one. Was there any as we go back through page one, are there any amendments on page one? How about page two? And so one of the issues on page two is, I think one of the questions is there some language, is there something in the statute, just a question for staff? Senator Steinmetz, and that is, who's an insurer?
who's
Let's
an
find,
insurer?
and maybe it's already covered in the statute, and that part of the statute is just not in the bill. But let's figure that out, and maybe we have to flesh that out a little bit. So then,
Along those lines,
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think that we do need to look at if that insurer covers federal programs, state program. So who is the insurer?
Mhm.
Definition. I don't know that we can come in here, we get in here and insure providing a group of, so you go to page 3 and it brings that an insurer. We need to know who the insurer is, because I don't know that we can come in here and tell CMS they're insured and that they have to comply with state law. And so it may have to be a private insurer or private state insurer or subdivision in the case of Natrona County.
Well, that's not the only one. I don't know if CNA still does a state plan, but CNA still does state plan. Do you know, Heather?
Mr. Chairman, it's
Cigna, thank you, correct me. Cigna does a state plan, but I can't imagine, but that's one of the things we need to make sure that we don't pull in somebody who's administering this when it's not, even if if they are an insurer in other instances, that they're not an insurer in instances where there only is an administrator. Okay, so anything else on page 2, page 3?
Page line 1, strike increase the premiums for.
Okay,
Okay,
is that it for right now?
No, I think what we want to do is have staff look at that and say, is there a way we can come back
So-
and clarify?
Yeah, you're not saying strike it now. You're saying let's ask about it now.
I think I think.
You
it
want to
needs be
strike
struck
increased
out of
premiums
there,
for
And then we need to come back with a Romanette someplace and say specifically what we want to do with that. So increase the premiums for. I think it gets back to that whole discussion, is this increased premiums that can demonstrate that they're not just because of status, right?
right,
You have to allow them to increase premiums. You just can't allow them to increase them.
Right, so in other words, you're not necessarily striking this out, but you're looking for some wordsmithing that narrows the scope.
I think you're bringing it into a new Roman.
Oh, really? You want to drive there? Okay.
And so my thought on that is maybe what you do is you leave that language alone. And then down below, either with the Romanette, or maybe it's just a continuation of the paragraph if there's not a second Romanette. That the increase in, that the ability to increase premiums is limited only to
Okay.
the
Either,
group.
yeah, that would
There you
work.
go.
Right, to the group or against the individual policyholder, but somehow then you carve out and does not extend to self-insured plans or other things like that. So
Yeah.
that recognizing that those
Leave it
people
the
have
way-
you just have to recover those costs across the pool. There's no other way
okay,
to do
so
it.
what are we doing for sure? Are we taking find the best verbiage to,
We want to create an exception for self-insured or other plans where the group is the same as the pool of insurers. Isn't that the idea? At least that's what I'm thinking. What were you thinking?
So what I was thinking is you can't increase the premiums for vaccination
Status,
status.
but you can for claims.
If it's actual claims.
It's an
you have to
actual
allow
claim.
them to increase
That's
that.
the intention.
So it's the status that we need to get to. You can't just because of the status of somebody's their vaccination status, you can't raise premiums.
But isn't
But if
that
it's
what it
But
says,
if-
Larry?
If.
I mean,
Go
shall
ahead.
not use the COVID-19 vaccination status of a person as a basis to reject, deny, limit, cancel, refuse to renew, increase premiums.
It may,
So this is the problem is if, even if it's status, whether maybe all of us that got vaccinated, maybe we screwed up and maybe we're gonna have a ton of problems. Maybe it's who knows which way is right. I mean, we don't know. We're not gonna know for another 10. So, but you come down to that, ultimately, when you go to the only reason you raise premiums is to cover
the cost.
the costs.
Right.
So the fact that you have a status, either vaccinated or not vaccinated, may end up resulting in the actuary saying, dude, you've got to start covering these because we have, here's some money here, here's the long-term ramifications of COVID. We have a series of people that have significant heart issues or lung issues or kidney
Think
issues. or
Agent
whatever.
Orange,
There you go.
10, 20, 30 years later, even offspring from people
Yeah, or
that.
COVID itself. I mean, just. the
Or
long-term
COVID
effects of
itself,
COVID, we're
either
forgetting about
way.
the vaccine.
I don't know. Maybe status is fine. But maybe it's not. I don't know.
I mean, if your status, for example, you're either a drinker or not a drinker. It affects actuarially, affects the cost of what that is. If you've got,
It's
You've
the
got-
level of drinking that affects it.
good, okay, touche. And
1 ounce is medically proven
know,
to be beneficial to
your-
lower your
your
HDL.
status of
Mr.
overweight.
Chair,
Your
Mr. Chairman,
overweightness carries, and so, I mean, but, you have those things, the fact that just the age factor that you have in your group potentially affects your pool and the actuarial saying, all right, in order to cover this, we've got to have our premiums have to be X.
Mr. Chairman, I think you bring up the point that we're making right now is we don't know. So for them to come in and rate it right now based on that would be premature. I mean, we have years of what smoking and drinking and Agent Orange and all these things do to you, but we don't know what this disease or the vaccination does yet. So for them to do that, we just feel it's premature and it shouldn't happen at this time. And so if you wanted to say, put a sunset on that in 10 years or something like that, that might be a compromise because we know the sunsets get us to look back at actions that we take to make sure they're still relevant. Would that be something that would help you?
Well, I just don't, what I don't want is, as an appropriator, sit down there and in the budget session, they came back and say, sorry, you can't change the AGI, you can't pass that rate on to the employer, state. You just have to now fund the reserve account so that we make sure we have enough money to cover that. I mean, when I had COVID last year, I reapplied for some life insurance this year and I didn't get a preferred rate. The fact that I don't smoke, don't drink, exercise, lost a bunch of weight, all that stuff on purpose. You know, I ended up with a much higher rate, and it's the only thing that was different was I had COVID and I hadn't COVID before. So they're, you know, the insurers are already taking this into consideration. The COVID is already a factor that they're looking at and saying, as an actuary, the thing that causes the most concern is the unknown. And that's so that the actuaries go out and say, holy cow, we have to apply for this, because once it starts, it's too late to rebound in. It's like waiting to fix fireman A for 8 years.
Or what's gonna happen,
Yeah,
or what's gonna happen with workers' comp for all the people that we.
we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, it's an unknown. So let me ask you this, what if the increase in premium is what's giving everybody else heartburn, do you have any heartburn with the rest of the paragraph?
No, I don't.
I don't necessarily have with the paragraph. I just think you just have, you know, and I don't have a problem with saying that you can't enforce this on a single group. I'm just looking, you know, like I'll say, go back to my original point, which is you have to be able to spread the costs, the actuarial costs across the pool. And sometimes that's the group, sometimes the pool is the group, and sometimes it's not.
That's right. Yeah.
And somehow we have to allow for that.
Okay, so we need to figure out based on the pool, what the pool is. If it's a group, we don't want it just on the group, but if it's a larger
Yeah.
pool,
I mean, the easiest fix right now is just to strike the language, and then we'll figure it out. But to strike the language, you know, then they can't, then they can single out Mike's business and say, well, let's raise Mike's.
they can effectively rate you out of the coverage.
Yeah, just rate you out of coverage, and that's what we
Yeah.
don't want.
And that's what if we said we limited the amount premiums could increase?
We don't know what their
Yeah.
actual costs are.
We don't know what those are.
But we know, but they have an experience as a group. So if you say it couldn't be more than,
Yeah, in this case, I don't want to pick numbers out. Because I don't know. So it's just a wild ass guess as to what would be the right number. I know what we want to do, I just don't know how to describe how to get.
well, let's think about it a little more.
Think
We're
about
not
it.
in a rush.
All right.
Run
So
it
that's,
past- run it
but that
past-
is a spot that we're gonna work on. Okay,
That's a rough spot, yeah.
It's a rough spot. okay.
And then are we gonna strike Romanet 1 down there, Mr.?
Mhm,
We're striking that, yeah.
yeah,
Okay,
19, 20, and 21.
Yeah,
Yep.
so
Yep.
Romanet I, and then we'll just have to, they'll smooth that up, because we won't need the Romanet anymore. It'll just come into the paragraph. That's just a technical correction. Is there anything else on page 3 or page 4?
just for my edification, Sherry, ask him why we have that marketed to diminish or decrease the symptoms of COVID.
Oh,
oh, you're on page 5 already?
Yep.
Okay, let me ask that.
And then I didn't have anything else on,
Mr. Chairman, before you continue, Senator Hicks, what line are you on?
Page 5,
he's on page 5. He's
Line?
on line
Line 9.
9.
Thank you.
I just want to know why that language is in there. It doesn't make any sense to me.
That's a good catch. I don't know, so. All right,
And if we don't do that, we may have to define vaccine.
I'll bet there's already a definition.
There might be a
in there.
definition of vaccine. Is there anything else on page 4 or 5?
No.
no,
Anything on page 6?
So we
I
still
had a
striking
X
10
out.
through 17?
yep, 10 through 17, we were going to strike.
Yeah.
Okay,
Where's 10 to 17?
Middle of it.
Oh, just that Romanet 2?
yeah, Romanet
Okay,
2
all
on
right.
page 6, we were striking that.
So. Is there
The
any
freedom of
objections?
speech issue,
Page 8.
Page 8,
Page 8.
Question of whether the current language captures private schools or does not.
So page 8, lines 18.
Correct.
yeah. Does it, yeah, so does it? Yeah,
Except as prohibit, but 35.414 deals only with public accommodations. But because we've said that, does that now capture private
Yeah,
schools?
we need to find
And
that out.
21.4309.
Yep.
yeah.
Which I would think in the, somewhere we could exempt private schools out if we wanted to somewhere, so. All right, that is all that I had except for on page 10, shall ever. On line
Get rid of
23.
the ever.
Never.
Forever and
So
ever.
do you have that? Do you have the, on page 10, Karen, do you have strike ever on line 23? Okay. Yeah, Karen, did you keep up with us? We didn't do that very formally.
I believe I did, yes.
Okay. So why don't you go ahead and catch up with staff and then just let us know if we need to hang out for a little while or if we'll come back in the morning.
You want me to text you or just come back down?
Text works for me.
Text works for me.
Text, okay, text works for me.
All right. Do you want to take a brief recess or just?
Yeah, we'll just, yeah,
Just for, in
Just-
case
just text
someone
us.
might be watching online.
yeah. So what we're gonna do is we're take a 15-minute recess and you're gonna go check that out and then let us know, okay?
All right, thank you.
Stand east to the
We'll
sound of
stand at
the
ease
gavel.
to
We
the sound of
don't-
the gavel, which is hopefully in about 15 minutes. So a quick